Israel's attacks on Gaza have left more than 253 people dead, including 66 children. US President Joe Biden expressed the same sentiment we've heard from every US president before him. Namely, Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas rocket fire. For decades, Democrats and Republicans have expressed unconditional support for Israel. But are things changing? Some Democrats are standing up and speaking out on the rights of Palestinians. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez criticized Israel on Twitter and expressed her concern for the plight of Palestinians on the ground. Ocasio-Cortez and at least 6 other members of Congress have introduced legislation to block a $735 million sale of weapons from the US to Israel. The sale has been approved by US President Joe Biden.
This is our business because we are playing a role in it. And the United States must acknowledge its role in the injustice and human rights violations of Palestinians.
The bill against arms sales to Israel is also being backed by Rashida Tlaib, the first Palestinian-American woman in Congress.
We must, with no hesitation, demand that our country recognize the unconditional support of Israel has enabled the erasure of Palestinian life and the denial of the rights of millions of refugees.
Tlaib also reportedly engaged Biden on the issue of Palestinian rights and urged Biden to speak out against the violence on a tarmac in Detroit. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar also came out in Congress and on Twitter to condemn Israel. Senator Bernie Sanders also published this op-ed in the New York Times, insisting the United States no longer be apologists for the right-wing Netanyahu government and its undemocratic and racist behavior. But it wasn't just the Squad and Sanders who've condemned Israel and the US's foreign policy. Representative Mark Pocan of Wisconsin called the US out on ignoring Israel's state-sanctioned police violence against Palestinians. Senator Robert Mendez of New Jersey, who received an award from American Friends of Likud in 2014, said he was deeply troubled by Israeli military action and demanded a full accounting of actions which led to civilian deaths. While Representative Gregory Meeks, who in 2014 told Netanyahu that Israel is the US's only true friend in the Middle East, threatened to send the Biden administration a letter requesting a delaying on the arms sale to Israel. Representative Gerald Nadler led 12 Jewish House Democrats in writing a letter to Biden saying Palestinians should know that American people value their lives as we do Israeli lives. Also, more than 500 Democratic Party staffers, including those who served on Joe Biden's 2020 campaign, have also signed an open letter, calling on the US president to do more to protect Palestinians and to hold Israel accountable for its action with respect to Gaza. So what's changed? For starters, Congress has become a lot more diverse. 1 in 4 members are people of color compared to 1 in 10 20 years ago. And with this diversity comes a wider spectrum of opinions and a stronger commitment to human rights. Put simply, it became harder for unconditional support in Israel to go unquestioned. When the Black Lives Matter movement swept the US in 2020, it made politicians and the public more aware of racial justice issues and more willing to throw their weight behind human rights. Some representatives like Cori Bush have even drawn comparisons between Black Lives Matter protests against racial discrimination and police violence in the US, and Palestinian protests against racial discrimination and police violence in the occupied territories. Some critics also say that former President Trump's unconditional support of Netanyahu and expanding settlements while defending white supremacists in the US has allowed for more American politicians to criticize Israel than ever before. And while criticism of Israel by politicians is still fairly rare, veteran pollster John Zogby told the BBC that just the fact that there had been a shift was dramatic and tectonic, and that support for Palestine has become a wedge issue driven by non-white voters, younger voters, and progressives. Could skepticism or criticism of Israel's violations become mainstream in American politics?